For the next video, what I want to talk about are the countries that are kind of close to each other in that it's England, or the United Kingdom, France, and Morocco. And I know Morocco doesn't really fit. It's kind of south of France. I know it's really not, but it's the closest I could bring it together to make them fit. I want to take you around the United Kingdom Pavilion at Epcot and show you around, tell you about what it is, what you can see here, and all the things that exist in this pavilion. The United Kingdom Pavilion is located between Canada and the International Gateway on the west side of World Showcase. It was another of the original opening day pavilions and hasn't changed much since debuting in 1982.
October 19th, 1982, dedication of the United Kingdom Showcase at Epcot Center. Walt Disney's Don Tatum.
Ladies and gentlemen, young ladies and young gentlemen, welcome to the United Kingdom. Here on this lovely lagoon where a number of the nations of the world are standing side by side in a symbol of friendship. It has long been said that the sun never sets on the British Commonwealth of Nations. And it's a very pleasing thing to be able to establish this piece of Britannic extraterritoriality today here in Walt Disney World.
And representing the United Kingdom, Mr. R.J. Saunders.
Background of beefeaters, flags, a London square. Perfect settings for those of us who've come from the United Kingdom to receive Don Tatum's warm words of welcome.
The United Kingdom is a welcome addition to Epcot Center, and this dedication will stand as an important Epcot moment.
It's designed to look like a stereotypical British village, but with a bit of a twist. Rather than depicting one time period, the Imagineers instead cover the history of the United Kingdom through the architectural styles ranging from the 1500s to about 1900. Let's take a walk along High Street, starting as you walk from Canada, walking toward the International Gateway. Off to your right is a little courtyard. This is a typical English Renaissance garden with a couple of planters and a fountain depicting a dolphin. Also notice that the Imagineers tinted the tops with soot coloring to make it appear as if they're actually in use. As you walk into the pavilion, you're headed toward a town center, which is known as Britannia Square, and it's modeled after a real place, its namesake, Britannia Square in Worcester, England. Like town squares around the world, this one represents the center of the community, a gathering spot of sorts. When you're standing in the central point in the square, you can go off in different directions, time periods, and really social classes. They went outside the box and decided to make a sundial as the center of the square. Yes, that brownstone pillar is a sundial. Take a closer look at it the next time you're there, and you can see the markings that indicate time, and as you study it and measure the shadows, check your watch to see how it measures up. Now as you look beyond it, you're standing before a castle-looking building modeled after the Hampton Court Palace in London. This imposing brick structure features Tudor architecture, which was the final phase of medieval architecture. When visiting here, be sure to check out some of the windows. In the upper left-hand window are the crosses of St. Andrew, the patron saint of Scotland, St. George, the patron saint of England, and St. Patrick, the patron saint of Northern Ireland. If you overlay these three crosses, I hear that's how you create the Union Jack, the traditional British flag. And in case you were wondering, that is why it's called the United Kingdom. It's a conglomeration of all of the countries under British rule: England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Beyond the center square, the village represented in the pavilion comprises four main streets. First, you have High Street, which is what many towns in the UK call the primary business street. You have Tudor Lane, which represents the House of Tudor, or the English royal lineage that includes Henry VIII. And then you have Upper Regency and Lower Regency streets, which represent the Regency period in the UK from 1795 to 1837, so there's an almost seamless blend of architecture that takes you from the streets of London back to the English cottage. The streets are cobblestone, there's a pub along the way, and the scent of fish and chips is heavy in the air, and it feels more or less like an authentic trip across the pond. One of the things you'll notice while standing here is that each structure represents a different era in British history. On the left side of the street is a unique building called the Tea Caddy. This structure was inspired by the childhood home of Anne Hathaway, the wife of William Shakespeare. As you head down Tudor Lane, you'll notice the architecture and time period changes on both sides of the road. The tea shop is designed to resemble a typical 1600s building. The next features a sign that reads established 1702, and the last is built in as an 1800s neoclassical style. But there's something most people miss here. There's a city gate in the alcove within the stone structure and between these two stores. During the Middle Ages, many cities were surrounded by a protective wall to keep invaders out and inhabitants safe. City gates were built into these walls to provide a controlled access to those wishing to enter or leave the city. In addition, the city gate became a hub of public information such as announcements, tax and toll schedules, and standards for local measures. As you reach the end of the road, it turns slightly and loops around a courtyard. The area directly in front of you that goes off to the right is Lower Regency Street, while the road that goes off to the left is Upper Regency Street. As I talk about the buildings, you should note that the ones on Upper Regency Street are associated with more nobility, while the ones on Lower Regency are more common in nature. The row houses face out onto the courtyard, which is really an homage to London's Hyde Park. When there's no performances going on, the area is peaceful and there are benches to sit around and relax for a while. The park also includes a gazebo that's perfect for afternoon performances. Surrounding the gazebo is a hedge maze fashioned after the Summer Leighton Hall maze created in 1846. The bushes themselves are about 2.5 feet tall, so you'll see children and sometimes adults making their way through this classic English maze. Behind the Victorian building and tucked in behind the gazebo is an English cottage garden. Homeowners would work on small patches of their land and grow food items to help supplement their diet. A variety of fruits and vegetables were often planted. Herbs were also found in these gardens at times, but they were usually planted for medicinal purposes rather than for seasoning. As the country became more prosperous and fruits and vegetables were easy to obtain, flowers began to find their way into these plots. Today, cottage gardens overflow with greenery and color. There's a pathway within it that you should take a few minutes to stroll along. You can walk along a typical English garden path going back towards the town square. This pathway and the houses lining it were taken from the set of the movie Mary Poppins. Now, as you exit the path, you'll go under a trellis and you're back onto High Street, right in front of the Yorkshire Fish and Chip shop. But obviously, the thing that most people come for, one of the more popular spaces inside the World Showcase, is the Rose and Crown pub. The British have an interesting tradition of having gathering spots that serve libations and food. These places are called public houses or pubs. The inhabitants of the British Isles have been drinking ale since the Bronze Age. Pubs required a license from the local magistrate, which regulated gaming and drunkenness, undesirable conduct, and other directives. That's why you'll see a sign that says fully licensed on the Rose and Crown signage. Pubs often had frosted or distorted glass to shield customers from the street traffic outside. Pubs were often owned by breweries, making ale and beer a better value than wine and hard liquor. Many of these traits can still be seen at the Rose and Crown. The Rose and Crown really represents a lot of these traditions that head over from Britain. The pub itself has two sections, the restaurant on the left, and the pub itself as you walk through the doors. There's a sign on the Rose and Crown on the bottom that reads, Autium cum dignate, Latin for leisure with dignity. Outside in the river pub section is a recreation of a lock found on the Grand Union Canal. Situated between Canada and the UK is a space for another pavilion, but it's used to house the World Showcase Pavilion. This area stretches behind the United Kingdom, pushing across the access roads. The pavilion is essentially a long, big, inflatable tent. It was put up quickly, and there's no reason that it can't come down quickly, except that it makes money for Disney in its current form, just like it is. Disney now promotes the 40,000 square foot function space as the world's largest indoor group facility located within a theme park. It's used for exhibitions, trade shows, receptions, banquets, conferences, and meetings of virtually any size and shape. The World Showcase Pavilion is out of place between the beautifully designed pavilions of World Showcase, but at least there's a gate along the promenade, so you don't really notice it. A lot of thought went into the design and layout, and there's a unique story to tell about the design of this particular pavilion. The basic concept was that the Imagineers wanted to capture the sort of essence of France at a time before the French Revolution. It's the time that defined France as beautiful, magical, and a romantic place in the world. And specifically, the Imagineers wanted to represent Paris, is because Paris really defines France. The Imagineers wanted to pay tribute to Walt Disney and his inspiration for Epcot's World Showcase, the World's Fair. Paris hosted one of the great World's Fairs in history. The Exposition Universelle of 1889 was held on the 100th anniversary of the storming of the Bastille, which had come to represent the birth date of a new, more modern France. Each of the world's fairs erected a structure that's a symbol of the fair. And in Paris, you have a creation by Gustave Eiffel. The tower was constructed for the 1889 exposition. In the design, the Imagineers captured a cityscape that we think of as France. Is it a true representation of France? Perhaps not. But you will find the essence of the beauty and the feel of France. It has this romantic feel, and intentionally, it's always springtime in Epcot. As we look around the grounds and gardens, we start by looking at the placement of the pavilion. It's located near the International Gateway on the southwest side, while the UK pavilion is on the other side of the gateway, sitting to the northeast. Now, why does this matter? Because the water that runs between them, which technically connects the World Showcase Lagoon to the waterways near the hotels and the studios that are over on the boardwalk, but it represents the English Channel, the body of water that physically separates England from France in the real world. In the real world, the southernmost city of Dover is in England, and it's a mere 33 kilometers or about 20 miles from the northernmost city in France, Calais. So putting France south of England makes complete sense. Again, reality meets whimsy. Now, the bridge to enter the France Pavilion is modeled after a real bridge between the famous Louvre Museum and the Institut de France, which is on the Seine River. Look over as you cross the bridge toward the International Gateway. On your right, you'll notice a bicycle parked next to an artist's easel, along with a partially completed painting. The painting itself is of the original bridge that crossed over the waterway here in Epcot before the International Gateway was completed. So it was a slightly different bridge that they've updated that looks more like the bridge that's actually in France. Now, as you come into the France Pavilion, the first thing you'll see is a representation of a famous advertising column, or the Morris columns, or cylindrical outdoor sidewalk structures with characteristic styles that are used for advertising and other purposes. Behind that, you can see a cityscape. You have fountains, gardens, and the structures that evoke the feeling of Paris. And in the back, you'll see the Eiffel Tower. But let's start up front. Before you is a small park inspired by Georges Seurat's painting A Sunday Afternoon in the Island of La Grande Jatte. This is a fairly famous painting which happens to be displayed in the Art Institute of Chicago. Now, you may also notice that this garden is perpetually in spring. No matter what time of year that you go, you'll see that the flowering plants that they put there are very much things that you would see in the spring. So the idea is to always evoke that memory of Paris in the springtime. Now, next to that is a fountain. Really pretty, and it fits in with the theme of the artistic elements. It has a nice reflection piece, and it has some water shooting across it. Now, speaking of artistic, turn around and look out toward the lagoon. Since the Sunday in the park is on the River Seine, and the bridge you crossed is a replica of the one that crosses the River Seine, you should let your imagination take you there. The lagoon is now the River Seine. You'll see some large green boxes that line the shore of our Seine here in Epcot, much as they do in the real thing in France. These are common in France, as many secondhand booksellers store their merchandise in similar structures. So they've done a nice job of kind of evoking that feeling like you're on the River Seine. Now, turning back to the buildings, the concept here is to evoke a portion of France with its buildings and architecture and the feeling of being in Paris. Each storefront tells its story of its own, from the bookseller to the parfumerie, to the glacé, to the sidewalk cafes, to the boulangerie, a replica of Les Halles, a famous Parisian market. These are things you would expect to find in any neighborhood in and around Paris. Now, the main street here in Epcot's Paris is named La Petite Rue, which literally translates to a small, quaint street. And now about the replica Eiffel Tower. The story goes that Disney obtained the original blueprints for the tower and scaled it down to about 1/10 size, and widened it slightly at the base to Champloy. This one stands at about 100 feet tall. They placed it on top of a building to give it a height so that it could be easily seen from the front of the pavilion. Richard Dakin, he says, "I can't think of any other building that so instantly brings to mind its home city and the country. The Eiffel Tower means Paris, France. Show someone an image of that tower and their mind instantly makes the association. It exists only to show off. It's a monument to being able to build awesome and lovely monuments." Much of the pavilion is dedicated to shopping. The storefronts mostly are what they appear to be. What you see on the outside is pretty much what you're going to see on the inside. As far as entertainment, there's a show called Servants Amusants, Amusing Servants, where French acrobats dressed as waiters do a series of juggling, balancing, and coordinated routines using chairs, tables, and of course, pieces of dinnerware. The act is comical and guests may be asked to participate. It is C'est Magnifique. Just the big draw in the French pavilion is the Impressions de France. Straight back in the pavilion is a representation of a landmark in Paris, the Palais du Cinéma. In the lobby area, don't miss the spitting gargoyle. This is a replica statue of one of the gargoyles that guard the Cathedral de Notre Dame. Impressions de France is an 18-minute film that captures the spirit of Paris on a 5-screen panorama. Some people have called this the best film at Disney, and I tend to agree. It's stunning and it's spectacular. You can easily get swept away by the land where beauty abounds and fairy tales were born. Through the air and at street level, experience France. It's really something remarkable. The visual tour of the nation is set against a musical score arranged by Buddy Baker. It really runs the gamut of French history, encompassing the music of classical French composers.
The latest addition to France is the Remy's Ratatouille adventure, where you get shrunk down to the size of a rat, and you go around through Remy's adventure. You put on 3D glasses, and they move you around through different rooms. It's a nice piece of technology that they're using to make you feel like you're really moving quickly, when in fact you're moving pretty slowly and moving from room to room. It's very, very cool.
France is known for its wine, and you can sample it at La Maison du Vin. France's wine shop offers fine French wine. There are actually 4 dining locations here in the French pavilion. The first is Les Halles Boulangerie Patisserie in the back of the pavilion. This is a counter service offering that is buffet style. You get in line and you select your items you want from the display case and pay for them and then go to a series of tables to eat. Or, of course, you can take them on the go. You'll find sandwiches, some familiar, some a little more unusual, but all delicious, some snacks, and, of course, French pastries.
Salam alaikum, and welcome to the overview of the Morocco Pavilion at Epcot, or more precisely, the Kingdom of Morocco, as it says on the signage in front of the pavilion. Morocco was the first pavilion added after park opening. It came along about 2 years after opening day, opening on September 1st, 1984. It's situated between France and Japan along the lagoon. The location itself is actually kind of clever. Situated next to France, the Imagineers played on the country's physical, actual locations. Morocco is across the Strait of Gibraltar from France. Well, technically from France's neighbor Spain. So it's not exactly geographically accurate, but it's still kind of clever, and here at Epcot they paid homage to the fact that France is right next to Spain and is across the Strait of Gibraltar. As you walk from Morocco to France, notice that the walkway becomes darker. This is intended to represent the Strait of Gibraltar. Morocco's relationship with the United States dates back to the Revolutionary War. Morocco was the first country to recognize the U.S. independence, and the king had a fair amount of correspondence with George Washington on the subject. Replicas of some of the letters and correspondence that they sent back and forth to each other can be found in the Marrakesh restaurant. Just walk in and ask to see them, they'll point you right to them. It's actually a nice little historical piece that exists there. King Hassan II was ruling Morocco when the pitch was made for World Showcase, but the connection goes even deeper. Hassan had met Walt Disney at Disneyland some years earlier and got a personal tour of the park. So as you might expect, he took great interest and asked to be included, but with a most unusual and an unexpected twist. The government itself would foot the bill for the design and construction and agreed to fund maintenance and upkeep. Who needs a sponsor when the government steps in and makes it happen? So let's talk about the grounds and gardens. The Imagineers worked with King Hassan to create something that was representative of the country. The pavilion itself is basically broken up into 2 areas, the Ville Nouvelle, or the New City, and the Medina, which means city in Arabic, or the Old City. Like the rest of the countries in World Showcase, the architecture is true to the country's origin, but it is the most authentically detailed and correct of all the pavilions in World Showcase. The buildings represent architectural styles found in the Moroccan cities of Fez, Marrakesh, Rabat, and Casablanca. The dominant feature here is a realistic minaret, typical in most Muslim countries. A minaret is a prayer tower, and it serves 2 purposes. The Prophet Muhammad told followers to call the faithful to prayer from the highest point in the city, and the minaret would be that, and the height of the tower is intended to help heat escape the mosque in warm North Africa. This minaret is a replica of the Koutoubia, whose namesake can be found in the city of Marrakesh. King Hassan wanted true authenticity, so he sent a group of artisans to Orlando to create the detailed work and to oversee the architecture. So yes, these were the artisans who worked for the king, who contributed to the pavilion. Now, as you walk through the pavilion, look at the detail work. In a word, it's astounding. But here's a detail you can't overlook. The Islamic religion prohibits artistic depiction of live objects. Therefore, their artists have developed a unique style of abstract design. Rather than plants, animals, and people, often found in Western art, Islamic decoration consists of detailed geometric patterns represented in tile walls and carved plaster on the buildings. In all, craftsmen used over 9 tons of tiles, most of them hand-cut to make the patterns you see. Each mosaic has at least one flaw in it. And that's because local belief dictates that only Allah can create something that is perfect. Just over the railing, by the Spice Road table, is an ancient-looking water wheel. This wheel is a working device and is used to provide some irrigation to the plants in the pavilion. It served as more of a focal point before the restaurant was added. Take a couple of minutes and just look at the amazing geometric patterns and colors of the tiles in the buildings. If you go into the brass bazaar, look up at the ceiling. It appears the posts, beams, and sticks that go overhead are open to the sky, but if you really take a closer look, you'll see that there's a skylight above, protecting the store from the elements. Look up at the ceilings and the tile works in many of the buildings, and be amazed at the intricate detail and beautiful ornate lamps and lanterns. Remember, all of this detail was supervised by the workers sent by King Hassan II, all to ensure authenticity. As you enter the main courtyard of the pavilion, you'll notice a fountain in front of you. This is supposed to represent a town, specifically Nezarine in Fez. To the left is the gallery, with a rotating display of art. The museum itself is on the small side, but take time to look around. It's a fascinating journey into the culture and history of Morocco, no matter what display they have on at the time you go. When you walk around through the pavilion, it is really something special. Most people just kind of walk by and go, yeah, okay, neat, fun, whatever. But it really is worth spending some time in and walking around. Trust me on this. Take your time and walk around. You will be amazed. The result is an amazingly immersive experience that makes one feel as if they've been transported to another place at another time. Throughout the pavilion, North African plants, including citrus trees, date palms, and olive trees, can be seen throughout. In general, Muslims don't consume alcohol, and many countries that are Islamic states outright ban its sale and consumption. But Morocco is fairly progressive in that sense, and they do sell alcohol in restaurants, though it's mostly for the tourists. Spice Road table now has a full bar, so you can get pretty much any cocktail you desire. Most of the pavilions in World Showcase are lit up as part of the illumination show, but Morocco is not. The minaret and representation of the mosque remain dark, as lighting them would violate local religious beliefs. Also, when you're looking at the Morocco pavilion from across the lagoon, you can actually see the top of the Tower of Terror over in Disney's Hollywood Studios. It's in the background of the Moroccan skyline. But the Imagineers were clever and overcame the problem of the viewpoint by painting the back of the tower and making the architectural details look more like Morocco, allowing it to blend right in as though it's part of the Moroccan architecture.